Racism often hides in plain sight, woven into the cracks of daily life. But in one struggling urban neighborhood, that quiet truth was about to ignite into undeniable action. What started as a brazen attempt by a gang to intimidate Max Simmons, a quiet, broad-shouldered black mechanic, would spark a chain of events that would unravel a dangerous criminal enterprise. None of Razor's men, fueled by hatred and arrogance, could have known that the man they underestimated was a former MMA fighter with years of experience in the cage, honed by brutal matches that had forged his resilience and sharpened his instincts. They saw his silence as weakness, his humility as submission, and his hands, scarred from years of hard labor, as incapable of striking back. But Razor and his crew were wrong. Before they realized it, their stranglehold on the neighborhood would begin to collapse. Their intimidation tactics would falter, their operations would unravel, and the mastermind pulling their strings would be dragged into the light. Mac's fight wasn't just about self-defense. It was about standing up for a community battered by fear and proving that unity and strength could triumph over hatred and oppression. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe. The steady hum of a pneumatic drill reverberated through the sunlit garage, blending with crackling rock tunes from a forgotten radio perched on a shelf. Marcus "Mac" Simmons leaned over the hood of a battered pickup truck, his broad hands moving deftly among the tangle of wires and bolts. Grease streaked his faded coveralls, testaments to hours of work. Yet there was calm in his every movement, a rhythm as steady as the sunlight streaming through the open garage door. This was his sanctuary, the hum of tools, the grit of effort, and the quiet triumph of fixing something broken. Outside, the bright midday sun lit up the city skyline, the sounds of traffic blending into the hum of a busy day. Mac straightened up, wiped his hands on a rag, and glanced at the clock on the wall. Almost lunchtime. He closed the truck's hood, slid his tools back into their place, and locked up the garage, leaving behind the comforting smell of oil and metal. A short walk later, Mac reached the Broken Tap, a dive bar nestled at the corner of a lively street. Its neon sign glowed faintly even in the daylight, the flickering letters adding to its scruffy charm. Inside, the dim lighting created a cool reprieve from the sun, while the low hum of conversation and the clinking of glasses set the scene. Lisa Torres, the bar's owner, greeted him from behind the counter. "Look who's here," Lisa said with a grin, drying a glass with a towel. "The champ graces us with his presence." Mac shook his head with a chuckle, walking up to the bar. "That champ title expired a long time ago, Lisa. These days, I'm just Mac the mechanic." Lisa gave him a knowing look. "You don't just stop being an MMA legend, Mac. And don't give me that mechanic stuff. You'll always be the toughest guy I know." Mac slid onto his usual stool, the leather groaning under his weight. Once a chiseled champion in the MMA circuit, Mac had retired nearly a decade ago. Injuries had forced him out, and time had added a little weight to his frame. These days, he preferred working on cars in his garage to throwing punches in the ring. "You're too kind," Mac said dryly, accepting the cold beer Lisa slid his way. "But I'm just here for your wings and some quiet." Lisa smirked. "Wings are on the way, and you know you'll always have quiet here. Unless someone starts trouble." Outside, the buzz of the street carried on, the chatter of passers-by blending with the hum of distant traffic. Across the road, a group of men lounged in the shade of a boarded-up storefront. Bald heads gleamed under the sunlight, their tattoos twisting across arms and necks like warnings. They were a familiar sight, a blight the locals had learned to avoid, not out of ignorance, but self-preservation. Johnny Razor Hart flicked his cigarette onto the cracked pavement, grinding it under his boot as his sharp eyes fixed on the bar. "Cozy little spot, ain't it?" he muttered to his crew, his tone carrying an edge that wasn't about appreciation. One of the others, a wiry man with a snake tattoo curling up his neck, smirked. "Looks quiet. Bet it doesn't get many visitors like us." Razor chuckled, his grin spreading like oil on water. "Let's change that." Inside, the bar buzzed with its usual calm. Mac sat near the counter, savoring his wings. Lisa was behind the bar, wiping down glasses and chatting with a couple of regulars. The jukebox played an old blues tune, filling the space with a lazy warmth. The door slammed open, shattering the bar's easygoing atmosphere like a thunderclap. 5 men strode in, their presence thick with menace, drawing wary glances from the regulars. At their helm was Razor, his sharp eyes scanning the room with the predatory air of someone who enjoyed the weight of silence that followed him. His gaze stopped on Mac, lingering with calculated intensity before his lips curled into a smirk. The room seemed to hold its breath, the air charged with unspoken challenge. "Well, look at this," Razor said loudly, his voice cutting through the room. "Didn't know this place came with a special attraction." Lisa straightened, her eyes narrowing as she stepped out from behind the counter. "Order something or leave. We don't tolerate trouble here." Razor smirked, ignoring her. His focus was locked on Mac. "Hey, big guy, you always eat this much? Or is this a cheat day?" Mac wiped his hands on a napkin and looked up, his expression calm, but his eyes sharp. "You'd better hope I don't decide to work this meal off." The room stilled, the tension thick as Razor's grin faded slightly. Behind Mac, a soft hum from the jukebox seemed to echo louder in the silence. Even Lisa, unshakable in her usual bravado, felt the weight of what was about to unfold. Razor leaned against a nearby table, his tattooed arms folded, his smirk radiating confidence. His gang spread out behind him, filling the cozy bar with an oppressive energy that made it feel suddenly too small. "You know," Razor began, his voice loud enough to cut through the quiet hum of conversation, "I'm starting to think this place has gotten too diverse." Mac didn't look up from his beer. He'd seen men like Razor plenty of times before. Loud, self-assured, and desperate for validation. They fed on intimidation and the fear of others. But Mac had long since stopped letting people like that get under his skin. "Don't see what that's got to do with me," Mac said evenly, taking a slow sip of his beer. Razor's smirk widened. "Oh, it's got everything to do with you, big guy. You're black, you're fat, and you're sitting here like you own the place." Lisa, standing behind the counter, straightened, her jaw tightening. She stepped forward, wiping her hands on a towel. "Take your boys and leave. Now." But Razor ignored her, his focus locked on Mac. "See, it's not about owning the place. It's about knowing where you belong. And you don't belong here." Mac placed his glass on the counter with deliberate care. He turned slightly in his seat, his expression calm but firm. "I belong where I want to be." Razor chuckled, glancing back at his crew. "You hear that? Big guy thinks he can talk back." One of the thugs, a wiry man with a shaved head and a snake tattoo curling up his neck, laughed. "Looks like he's got more to say than room for it in that gut." The room was silent now, save for the faint hum of the jukebox playing a slow blues tune in the corner. Mac shifted in his seat, finally meeting Razor's gaze with a piercing calm. "You've said your piece. Time to move along." Razor's smirk faded, replaced by a thin, hard line. "How about we move you along instead?" The tension in the broken tap was thick enough to choke on. Razor's smirk had faded into something darker, and his gang shifted behind him, their confidence bolstered by numbers. Mac remained seated, calm as a boulder in a storm. Lisa stood at the edge of the bar, her fists tightening around the towel she held, ready to intervene if necessary. Razor stepped closer, his boots echoing loudly against the wooden floor. "You see? It's not personal, big guy. It's just people like you. You don't get it, do you? You come into places like this, act like it's yours, like you belong here." Mac leaned back slightly, tilting his head. "Places like this." His voice was calm, but a sharp edge undercut the words. "Yeah," Razor said, grinning as if Mac had proved his point. "You know, bars, neighborhoods, the country. It's not for you." Lisa interjected, her voice cutting through the room like a whip. "Enough! Take your garbage ideas and get out. Now." But Razor ignored her, his focus unwavering. He gestured to Mac with a sneer. "See? I'm doing you a favor, teaching you a lesson. You people think you can come in? Take over. But not here. This is our space. Mac straightened in his seat, his eyes cold and steady. Our space? You mean you and your little group of bald cheerleaders? He motioned lazily toward Razor's gang. Or are you talking about something bigger? The insult stung, but Razor forced a laugh. Funny guy, but yeah, bigger. This country was built for people like me. Our blood, our skin. You think you're entitled to walk in and take it all? Mac leaned forward, his massive frame suddenly more imposing. Take what? A bar stool? A plate of wings? His voice dropped lower, almost a growl. Or is it just the fact that I exist that gets under your skin? Razor faltered, but his gang jeered behind him, and he recovered quickly. You people don't know your place anymore. You're ruining what this country's supposed to be. Mac stood slowly, his height towering over Razor. The leather stool creaked as it shifted back. Let me guess, you think you're protecting some kind of legacy, right? Fighting for your so-called heritage. He took a step forward, and the room seemed to shrink. But tell me something. What's your legacy, exactly? Hating people who look different? Running around with your pack? Stirring up trouble? The gang bristled. One of them, a wiry man with a snake tattoo, spitting out, "Better than lying down and letting them take over." Take over what? Mac shot back, his voice sharp as steel. Last time I checked, the only thing you own is a mouth that won't stop flapping. The gang sneered, but Razor held up a hand to silence them. Look at you, he said, stepping closer, his voice quieter but more venomous. Big, fat, black. Bet you've been coasting your whole life on sympathy and handouts. Mac laughed, a low, dangerous sound. You're lucky my hands are still on this counter. But if you keep running that mouth, you'll see just how hard I've worked for everything I've got. Razor sneered. What are you gonna do? Sit on me, Mac smiled. But there was no humor in it. Not yet. First, I'll give you a chance to explain why you think you're better than me. Go on. Educate me. The gang laughed, emboldened by Razor's smirk. You think this is a joke? Razor asked, spreading his arms. This is about purity, about keeping our traditions alive. Mac's gaze sharpened. Purity? He stepped even closer, forcing Razor to tilt his head to maintain eye contact. You mean the tradition of running scared every time someone doesn't look like you? The tradition of hiding behind a gang because you're too weak to stand on your own? Razor's smirk vanished. You've got a big mouth, fat man. Mac's voice dropped to a near whisper. And you've got a small mind. The gang surged forward, emboldened by the tension. But Lisa slammed a hand on the bar. Enough! You throw the first punch, and you're done. You hear me? Razor sneered, but turned to his men, signaling them to hold back. He turned to Mac with a twisted grin. All right, big guy. We'll give you one last chance to walk out of here while you still can. Mac's shoulders squared as he stepped forward, towering over Razor. That's funny, he said softly. I was about to say the same thing to you. The silence that followed was deafening. The jukebox's blues tune, the only sound in the room. Razor's eyes darted to his crew before he snapped. Get him! The gang moved as one, and Mac's fists clenched, ready to show them just how misplaced their confidence was. The moment Razor barked the command, his gang surged forward, chairs scraping the floor, and boots pounding against the worn wooden boards. Mac had been in countless fights before, but this was different. This wasn't a cage with rules and referees. This was chaos. The first man to reach Mac, a wiry guy with a snake tattoo, lunged at him, aiming for a cheap shot to his ribs. Mac sidestepped effortlessly, his years of training turning into muscle memory. He countered with a sharp elbow to the man's jaw, sending him sprawling into a table, drinks flying. Another thug charged, brandishing a broken beer bottle. Mac ducked low, driving his shoulder into the man's stomach and slamming him against the bar. Glass shattered behind him as Lisa ducked for cover, shouting, "Don't wreck my place!" Razor circled in the background, barking orders. "Hit him! Bring him down!" Two men came at Mac simultaneously, one swinging wildly while the other tried to grab his arm. Mac blocked one punch and twisted free of the other's grip, his massive hand grabbing a nearby stool. With a quick, powerful swing, he sent one attacker crashing into a row of chairs. The other hesitated, his confidence faltering. But Mac didn't wait. A sharp kick to the chest sent him sprawling backward. As the bar erupted into chaos, Mac couldn't ignore the destruction around him. Tables overturned, chairs broken, glasses shattered. It wasn't just his fight anymore. Lisa's place, the bar that felt like home, was being torn apart. He grabbed Razor's collar mid-swing, pulling him close. "You want this fight? Take it outside," Mac growled, his voice low and dangerous. With a powerful shove, he sent Razor stumbling toward the door. "Come on!" Razor yelled to his crew, rage flaring as he stormed outside. Mac followed, his broad shoulders filling the doorway as the bar fell eerily quiet behind him. Outside, the streetlights cast long shadows across the cracked pavement. Razor's gang spread out, forming a loose circle around Mac. Razor's grin returned, more sinister now. "This ain't over, fat man. Not by a long shot." The first punch came from Mac, catching Razor's right-hand man in the temple and dropping him instantly. The gang hesitated for a moment, realizing this wasn't going to be as easy as they'd thought. Then they surged again, more coordinated this time. Mac fought smart, using his surroundings to his advantage. He ducked behind a parked car as one thug swung a metal pipe, the clang of steel against metal echoing through the street. Before the attacker could recover, Mac came around the side, grabbing his arm and twisting it until the pipe clattered to the ground. A swift knee to the gut sent the man crumpling. Another thug tried to tackle Mac from behind, wrapping his arms around his waist. For a moment, it seemed like the gang had the upper hand as two more joined in, trying to pin Mac down. Razor stepped forward, his grin widening. "What's the matter, old man? Feeling your age?" Mac grimaced, his muscles straining under the weight of his attackers. He dropped to one knee, his breathing labored. Razor laughed, stepping closer. But Mac wasn't done. He shifted his weight suddenly, using the momentum to throw off his attackers. As they stumbled back, he grabbed a trash can lid from the sidewalk and used it to deflect Razor's punch before countering with a powerful uppercut. The fight continued with a brutal rhythm, each move more desperate and calculated. Mac's endurance was tested as the gang fought relentlessly, their numbers wearing him down. A blow to his side sent him staggering, and for a moment he doubled over, clutching his ribs. Razor moved in for the kill, raising a steel baton he'd picked up from the ground. "End of the line," Razor sneered, bringing the baton down. Mac rolled to the side at the last second, grabbing Razor's arm and twisting it sharply. The baton fell to the ground, and Mac followed up with a series of rapid punches, his strength and precision turning the tide. Razor stumbled back, his nose bleeding and his confidence shattered. The remaining gang members hesitated, their earlier bravado fading as they saw Razor on the defensive. Mac stood tall despite his labored breathing, his eyes burning with determination. "You're done," he growled, his voice echoing in the tense silence. The street outside the broken tap was eerily quiet, save for the heavy breathing of the battered gang and the distant hum of traffic. Razor and his remaining crew limped away, throwing threats over their shoulders. "This ain't over," Razor spat, his voice trembling with rage. "We'll finish what we started." Mac watched the group of men walk away, his body aching, but his stance unbroken. Adrenaline still coursed through him, and he turned back toward the bar. Lisa was standing in the doorway, arms crossed, her expression unreadable. She approached him, her eyes scanning him for any signs of injury. "You okay?" Her voice was soft, but tinged with frustration. Mac wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth and shrugged. "I'm fine. They'll think twice before trying something like that again." Lisa glanced at the overturned tables and broken chairs, visible through the bar's open door. "Maybe, but my place is wrecked, Mac. This isn't just about you. They dragged this fight into my bar." Mac's expression tightened, guilt flashing across his face. "I didn't want it to go this way, Lisa. I tried to keep it contained, but you saw them. They weren't walking away." Lisa sighed, rubbing her temples. "I know. This place is all I've got, Mac. It's my livelihood. Now I have to figure out how to fix this mess. I'll help, Max said firmly. "I'll cover the damages. Do whatever it takes to make this right." Lisa softened slightly, her arms dropping to her sides. "I know you didn't ask for this, but those guys, they're dangerous, Mac. They're not gonna let this go." Mac met her gaze, his voice steady. "Neither will I. They came here looking for trouble, and they found it. If they come back, I'll be ready." Lisa shook her head. "You can't take on all of them by yourself. This isn't a cage fight, Mac. There are no rules out here." Mac placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "I've dealt with worse. Trust me." The night after the fight, the street outside Mac's garage felt eerily quiet. The usual hum of the neighborhood, the distant rumble of traffic, the chatter of late-night passers-by, was replaced by a heavy stillness. Mac stood in the open doorway of his shop, his eyes scanning the shadows beyond the streetlights. He knew Razor's threats weren't idle, and the gang wouldn't let their defeat go unanswered. It started small. The next morning, Mac found a stack of old tires in his shop, slashed, the rubber shredded beyond use. A message was scrawled in red spray paint across the side of his garage. "Know your place, old man." Mac stared at it for a long moment, his jaw tightening as he grabbed a rag and started wiping it off. It wasn't the first time someone had tried to intimidate him, but this felt different, more calculated. The next few days brought more signs. An unfamiliar sedan sat parked across the street from his shop, its windows tinted too dark to see inside. When Mac stepped out to take a closer look, the car pulled away, its engine growling like a warning. On another evening, a pair of Razor's thugs loitered near the alleyway, their silhouettes visible in the glow of a street lamp. They didn't approach, but their presence was a clear message. They were watching. One day, Lisa called Mac, her voice trembling, fear laced with anger. "Mac, they're escalating. This isn't just intimidation anymore." "What happened?" Mac asked, his voice low but steady. "They keyed my car," she said, her frustration boiling over. "Not just a scratch. Deep gouges, all over the hood and sides. They did it right outside the bar. Broad daylight. No one even tried to stop them." Mac's grip on the phone tightened. "Did you see who it was?" "No, but it was Razor's guys," Lisa said. "I recognize their type. Smirking, arrogant. They didn't care who saw them. They even knocked over the patio chairs on their way out, just to make a statement." Mac's jaw clenched as he listened, anger simmering beneath his calm exterior. Did anyone else see it? Did anyone say anything? "Some of the regulars saw, but they're scared, Mac," Lisa replied. "These guys have been lurking outside the bar for days, just staring through the windows, making everyone nervous. People don't want to get involved. They're afraid of what'll happen if they do. They're trying to isolate us," Mac said, "make you feel like you're alone." "Well, it's working," Lisa snapped, her frustration breaking through. "I can't keep living like this. Every time I leave the bar, I feel like someone's watching me. Last night, I swear I saw a car following me home. It stayed just far enough back to make me second-guess myself." Mac's stomach twisted at her words. He'd felt the same unease himself. The constant surveillance, the subtle reminders that Razor's crew was always nearby. "Lisa, listen to me," he said firmly. "You're not alone in this. They're pushing, but that's all it is. Pushing. They think if they scare us enough, we'll fold." Lisa's voice softened, but the fear was still there. "And what happens if we don't? What if they stop pushing and start doing something worse?" Mac exhaled slowly, his resolve hardening. "Then we push back harder, together." Lisa was quiet for a moment, then said, "Mac, they're not just after you or me. They're after all of us, the whole neighborhood. And they won't stop unless someone makes them." "Then I make them stop," Mac said, his tone calm but edged with steel. "They don't know it yet, but they've already lost. They picked the wrong fight." Determined to put an end to the harassment, Mac visited the local police station the next day. The precinct was a maze of worn desks and weary faces, the kind of place where paperwork piled higher than resolve. Detective Andrew Parker sat behind one of the desks, his sleeves rolled up and his eyes heavy with fatigue. "Detective Parker," Mac began, his voice steady but firm.